Right now with capitalism, all of the gains in automation, it goes to the owner class. All you have to do is have everyone be an owner, and now suddenly any gain in automation is a gain for everybody. If you grow just one thing, it may not grow as well as if it grows with another thing. A good example of that is called the Three Sisters method of farming.
There is definitely multi apartment buildings or multifamilies that do passive design.
$100 million that they gave to Joe Rogan that they would kind of be out if they breach contract. Is that a bigger number? Or is 2 billion a bigger number?
I don't know,
It's
Zach.
a tough
This
one. I
is
know,
really hard.
and maybe
Yes.
comparing numbers is not Jeremy's strong suit. Gotta go kill a Jenny.
I still don't think you should kill her. I don't think it's a good idea.
It's a ghost, dude. Welcome back, everybody, to Bread Theory. Tonight, we're going to be continuing on with The People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. We are in Chapter 8. This is the second half of it. And we are looking at land grabs in early American history. I like that illustration. Thank you so much. So joining me, as often is the case, is my wife Amanda. How you doing?
Hey,
Bringing the noise, bringing the fire.
sometimes the fire starts to burn.
Right.
And it starts to spread.
Yeah, that one.
I'm gonna bring that attitude home.
Yeah,
You
obviously.
better do something with your life.
Anyway,
Gold star if anybody caught that reference.
so that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. So, yeah, as always, this is an educational space. The only bad question is one asked in bad faith. I had one of those guys in the other night, last night, right at the end, just throwing out all the really tired, oh, the USSR sucks and communism sucks sort of talking points, and ran out of shit to say, and so just started insulting Amanda and me. And yeah, that'll get you a quick ban. So if that's how you get your jollies, first of all, it's very sad that's the
That's
way you're spending a Monday evening is waiting because I make new followers wait 10 minutes to be able to comment, and if you're waiting that long just so you can say the dumbest shit imaginable and then get banned right away, then I don't know. Find something better to do with your life, really.
we don't got time for smooth brains around here.
Yeah, that's right. So anyway,
Da, da, da,
if you have real questions or real points of contention to talk about, that's always welcome.
Or you can have a debate without using personal attacks to make a point.
Well, yeah, sure. Yeah. So, just so you know, I've heard pretty much all of the uh, talking points of like, oh, let's see, Dennis Prager, Ben Shapiro, Shabibo, whatever his name is.
Benjamin
Yeah.
Shapiro.
Oh, he's Italian now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mostaccioli.
Oh my
Spaghetti.
God. Okay. Tucker Carlson, all the types. So, if you are gonna come in with random talking points, probably make it better than that. Otherwise, it's not gonna last very long. But anyway,
If you're gonna be here, you better be nice, or we're gonna put you out on the ice.
that was a thing that rhymed.
I get no credit for my creativity
You're
unless it involved sugar,
very
flour,
creative.
and other various materials.
I give you credit for your creativity all the time. So, anyway, also thinking about doing another leftist karaoke night sometime near the end of the month. So,
I'd be careful when you select that.
really, is there maybe holidays at that time of the year?
Yeah.
Yeah, should I try not to overlap with the holidays?
Yeah.
Okay.
You're gonna
So
be
Christmas
tired
is
of...
on the 25th,
Really?
which is a Sunday. which is a Sunday.
Yep.
Christmas is on a Sunday is what I meant to say, but thanks for jumping down my throat. Um, so we could look at doing it Friday. It'd be actually the fifth Friday, but that's okay. The 30th, because like I don't think anyone usually has New Year's Eve plans.
Oh, I do.
Yeah, what do we do on New Year's Eve?
Karaoke.
I see what you did there. But we could also do it in the middle of the week. We could do a Thursday, a Wednesday. Those are days in the middle of the week.
You want me to just stare off into the nothingness?
Yes.
Hey,
Yeah.
potato chips.
Oh my God. No, we're not going to do that. Um. Anyway, so if you have any days that you prefer at the end of the month where you really want to make sure to make this last of the year leftist karaoke night, let me know. And yeah, we'll tentatively plan it for the last week of December. And it doesn't I don't think we'll make this one holiday themed. I get pretty annoyed by Christmas music, so
That's all I want to sing.
well, I mean you can. Well, I will not stop. I'll put it that way. I won't stop anyone from singing holiday music, but you don't have to have that as your explicit theme.
All I want to do.
It's so fun when you yawn and sing at the same time. That's really cool. Anyway, so there's that. And then looking forward to next year, to January, which is next year. January 1st, the nominations for the third annual Lefties Awards are going to open up. So
The lefties.
I think you're making a backwards L as far as the camera's concerned, but there you go.
Left.
If you have any creative works that you would like to nominate, it could be your own, it could be other people's, in virtually any media category there is. Yeah, start thinking about that now. It has to have occurred within the confines of 2022. That's why we're waiting until the first day of next year to start the nominations. And we'll have 2 weeks of nominations. Then that process will close and we will open the voting. And I'm looking at getting the award show all together for sometime in February. Probably not exactly coinciding with like Valentine's Day, but sometime around
Probably
that time.
on Valentine's Day.
Yeah, well, that might be a conflict of interest. Some people might have dates for that.
Hi, James.
Hey, James, how's it going? Anyway, so start thinking about that. If you've seen some particularly good leftist creations this last year,
I
keep
do
that
every day.
in the back of your mind and be ready to nominate. And nominations will take place.
Alright, Brown Noah Samson.
Yeah, those could be best creators, best YouTube creators.
Abby Shapiro. Just kidding.
No,
She's the greatest.
no, she's not. She's not the greatest at anything.
The only reason I know how to be a real woman.
She's greatest at having an astroturfed YouTube channel.
It's not
But that's not gonna
astroturf.
be-
Mommy and Daddy pay for it.
It's exactly the same thing. Anyway, if you have any in mind, keep those in the back of your head and be ready to nominate them starting beginning of January. All right. How are you doing tonight, James? Good to see you again. Let's get into
Let's get into it.
tonight's reading. I think we'll set that as our aspect ratio or whatever you want to call it.
Look at you making a new leaf.
So Well, last we left our story off, we were talking about American land grabs. Oh, doing well. Doing pretty well. Had a nice day. I don't have to shovel tonight, so that'll be good. I'm not going to be quite so tired as I would have been tomorrow. So, happy for that. That the snow held off enough. Anyway, we were talking about land grabs last time, and we will get right back into it tonight. That is the motion of a grabbing. Too bad you don't have one of those robot grabbing claws that would really illustrate the point. Or like one of those dinosaur head things that open and shut.
I want one of those for when you hide my snacks.
When am I hiding your snacks? And how would that help you find them?
Well, help me get them.
Oh, because you have Tyrannosaurus arms?
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. Anyway, let's hear some more about land grabs in early America.
We're not interested in your crap today.
I am totally interested in your crap. Okay? Don't worry.
Potato chips.
No, we're not going to do...
It's hard to say. After the first
the-
rush, enlistments began to dwindle.
Okay,
The
we'll back up just a little bit.
1846 elections showed none seem willing to take their stand for peace at all risks, and all seem willing that the war should be carried on in some form or other. Where was popular opinion? It's hard to say. After the first rush, enlistments began to dwindle. The 1846 elections showed much anti-Polk sentiment, but who could tell how much of this was due to the war? In Massachusetts, Congressman Robert Winthrop, who had voted for the war...
So just a refresher, the war that they're talking about is basically going to war with Mexico at the time, because that included a lot of the western states, Nevada, Colorado, New Mexico, parts, Utah. I think it was just parts of Colorado, actually, and then California, principally. So we were trying to come up with reasons to basically just conquer the West, and make it seem like we were justified, but really, it was a very thin justification. So, yeah.
was elected overwhelmingly against an anti-war Whig. Schroeder concludes that although Polk's popularity fell, general enthusiasm for the Mexican War remained high. But this is a guess. There were no surveys of public opinion at that time. As for voting, a majority of the people did not vote at all. And how did these non-voters feel about the war? Historians of the Mexican War have talked easily
Controversial
about
opinion.
the
Voting
people.
should be a federal holiday. Always.
I don't see why that should be controversial. Yeah, it definitely should be.
Well, some people get their...
Yeah, it should also be mandatory. Country like Australia can do it. I think we can too. We need to
But this isn't Australia, it's America.
Yeah. Is that supposed to be an Australian accent?
Yes.
That's not an Australian accent. This is an Australian accent. No, that's actually a terrible one too.
This is an Australian accent.
Oh, that was like 3 in 1 there. You just ping ponged all over the place there. I'm not even sure where we traveled to in that sentence.
Wow.
Uh,
That's my life, guys.
yeah,
I try and I get made fun of.
yeah. Yeah, you're my comic relief. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. Everyone loves you. You're the stream favorite anyway. So like, I got to get my jabs in, one way or another.
Don't be Jelly Belly, it's okay.
Okay, I'll try not to be Jelly Belly.
It's America! America.
Yeah. So,
I just picture a rusty pickup truck. Actually, no, it has to be a pristine pickup truck with at least 3 American flags on it. They can be sticker decals, but ideally one of them should be airborne so people can see the colors stream
see that flap.
down the highway.
Yeah. and then adorn that with the thin blue line Punisher skull in the back of the truck window.
Blue lives
Yeah,
matter.
'cause people are born cops. I mean, I know with as many of them that look like just thumbs, that it does seem like, cop is a race, but in fact it is not.
I was born to be a cop,
Yeah.
but then some other stuff happened.
Yeah, you came to your senses, realized you'd be upholding a
I had a
racist.
serious blood condition. It's caused the copiness in my DNA to be removed. Thanks, James. I take a lot of pride. Dan is really smart.
Yeah, Dan is yeah, very, very smart. And
I've graduated college.
Knowledgeable.
I'm going to grad school. If they let me in.
they will let you in. They will let you in. So what exactly is your degree going to be?
Special education.
Nice. Very cool. Mr. Dan for a reason. Maybe it should be Professor Dan.
And you could be professor.
Nope. Continuing on.
And public opinion, like Justin H. Smith, whose 2-volume work, The War with Mexico, has long been a standard account. Quote, "Of course, too, all the pressure of warlike sentiment among our people had to be recognized, more or less, for such is the nature of popular government." Unquote. Smith's evidence, however, is not from the people, but from the newspapers, claiming to be the
Don't
voice of the
slam
people.
it.
The New York
Not.
Herald wrote in August 1845, "The multitude cry aloud for war." And the New York Journal of Commerce, half playfully, half seriously, wrote, "Let us go to war. The world has become stale and insipid. The ships ought to be captured and the cities battered down and the world burned up so that we can start again. There would be fun in that, some interest, something to talk about."
God, that's fucking psychotic. This is the ideology of psychopaths.
Whoa.
Oh, I'm really bored. Why don't I just burn an entire civilization and make war on them? Because at least that'd be fun and we could write about it in the paper.
Because I'm rude.
Because what?
Because we're rude.
Yeah, we're rude. Yeah, that's putting it incredibly mildly. It's just, how do you come to that mentality that war is fun? And like, I guess if you've never been to war yourself and you never have to really sacrifice yourself, then sure, it can be something fun that happens a ways away that you can just talk about. Have some good old town gossip.
It's like the purge.
How's it like the purge?
The top 1% never really suffers or
Oh, that's
has
true.
to engage. They just get to get the finest technology to protect them until the next wave. But oh, it's really fun to watch.
Oh, what a disappointing TV series that was too, because they started playing around with those ideas, and they just gave it up like halfway through the series, and then it was just gore from that point. It was just people shooting each other and having to decide whether or not they were going to go out and purge or whether they're going to sit and drink at a bar.
See, I figure a lot of people wouldn't, because I think enough people have a moral compass.
Yeah, but I mean that was one of the questions that the purge played around with. It's like, if you have social permission to do whatever the hell you want, how many people would actually go along with it? Because,
Oh, I guess.
Nazism was tolerated by average people that maybe didn't participate in any of the atrocities, but nonetheless saw it as maybe beyond their control, maybe just tried not to think about it. In any case, allowed it to happen collectively.
Right.
So there were some good ideas that could have been mined out of that, but they just never did it. They went for the commercial success instead, which I don't think they even got that.
Commercial success is for suckers. Try harder.
Try, yeah, funny.
You're like, don't finish that.
No.
The
was a
New
family
York
show.
Morning News said, young and ardent spirits that throng the cities want but a direction to their restless energies, and their attention is already
Hey,
fixed
guess
on
what?
Mexico.
Taking a walk is also really helpful
We're
to deal
the
with that
newspaper.
restless energy.
Yeah, right.
Not putting your life on the line for people who don't give a shit about you. Sorry, what?
You put your life on line and slaughter hundreds or thousands of innocent people for people that don't care about you.
Right.
Just to further their interests. Yeah. So sure, just take a walk instead if really you're struggling with that kind of tension.
Yeah.
Papers reporting a feeling in the public or creating a feeling in the public.
Manufacturing dissent,
Ah.
as Noam Chomsky termed it. I don't know if he was the first to call it that, but that certainly is one of his most famous writings. Was how the press is in league with the political establishment and will do what they can to build cases for them to do things like go to war or oppress one group or another, or build up their own power. So they work hand in hand.
That's rude.
Yeah, because that's in theory, that's the exact opposite of the way the press is supposed to function. The press is supposed to be independent of politics, or of the political system anyway, and hold it to account by telling hard truths and stuff like that. But it doesn't often happen that way, at least not the mainstream press. Mm-hmm. They're more often cheerleaders, like especially thinking back to like the lead up to the Iraq War. Oh my God, the press could not get enough of like, oh yeah, we should go to war. We should go to war. They got weapons of mass destruction. They just totally uncritically swallowed that lie and didn't look into it too deeply until after the fact.
Hindsight's 2020.
Yeah, but like they didn't really even try too hard
know.
at current sight.
I'm just saying, like, I'm sure that was their mentality.
Oh, I'm sure that's the way they explained it away, for sure. But
That's totally fine for me to encourage this sort of BS
we didn't know what we didn't know, but
No, we do.
But they should have known. That's the thing.
Failures.
Moving on.
Those reporting this feeling, like Justin Smith, themselves express strong views about the need for war. Smith, who dedicates his book to Henry Cabot Lodge, one of the ultra-expansionists of American history, makes a long list of Mexican sins against the United States and ends by saying, quote, "It rested with our government, therefore, as the agent of national dignity and interests, to apply a remedy." He comments on Polk's call for war, quote, "In truth, no other course would have been patriotic or even rational," unquote. It is impossible to know the extent of popular support of the war, but there is evidence that many organized working men opposed the war. Earlier, when the annexation of Texas was being considered, working men meeting in New England protested the annexation. A newspaper in Manchester, New Hampshire wrote, quote, "We have heretofore held our peace in regard to the annexation of Texas for the purpose of seeing whether our nation would attempt so base an action. We call it base, because it would be giving men that..."
Base, not based. An important distinction.
What?
"live upon the blood of others, an opportunity of dipping their hand still deeper in the sin of slavery. Have we not enough slaves now?" There were demonstrations of Irish workers in New York,
Yeah,
Boston,
apparently.
and Lowell against the annexation of Texas, Philip Foner reports. In May, when the war against
Do you
Mexico
think
began,
people
New
ever
York
just
workers...
get like their sense of being by getting to oppress someone else?
Oh
And
yeah,
that's the
a lot of
only
people,
way.
a lot of rich people, in fact, derive a lot of their self-worth from knowing that other people can never have and will never have what they do.
Right. It's like, suffer.
Right, because, I must be a deserving rich person and they must be the deserving poor. Deserving of being poor, that is. Everyone just gets what they deserve. We live in a meritocracy, after all.
But we live in a society where you have kids like kids, whatever, they're not. People, like the people we work with,
Mm-hmm.
who work hard, work full time,
Mhm.
but can't afford a 1-bedroom apartment.
Yeah,
They're probably some of the most reliable workers
sure.
that some of these places have, but like
Well, and then,
they're not deserving. It might be the only job they
yeah,
can handle doing.
in many cases, they looked at as deserving even less than workers that are not on some form of disability. Because if they're on disability, there is such a thing as disability minimum wage, which is much lower. Let's find out. In fact, let's find out what it is for Minnesota.
Oh, I don't even know if I want to know.
Well, it's important. It's
The
certainly
fact that you
not
can
close
use
enough.
somebody's physical, like their ability, ableism, to lowball them in the workplace, just
Yep.
that's gross.
Let's find out. So here we go. Department of Labor and Industry. Disabled worker employment information. Disabled worker is a person whose capabilities are limited in the performance of the tasks in a particular employment situation. How much do they have to be paid? A disabled worker has to be paid at least the minimum wage or a percentage thereof based on the extent to which a worker's performance is limited, but in no case may fall below 50% of the minimum wage.
So $4 an hour.
Yep. If a worker is significantly disabled, you can pay them $4, a little over $4 an hour in Minnesota. It's absolutely disgusting, isn't it?
Like, are you kidding me?
Hmm. But the employer has to first file a sub minimum wage permit for each performance limited person. They're issued by the Department of Labor.
I wonder how many of those permits go out every year.
That's a good question.
What is the permit called?
A sub minimum wage permit. Uh-huh. I mean, minimum wage at what is our minimum wage? 8. State minimum wage. Oh, so on January 1st, 2023, it's going to go up to $10.59 an hour. For large employers, $8.63 for other state minimum wages. So for your average small business, it's $8.63, which is a joke. Absolute joke. I'm, doing my snow plowing. I make more than 3 times that, and it's still not great money.
There's only 13 states that have abolished the sub minimum wage.
What states are those?
Maine, Maryland, New Hampshire, Oregon, Washington, Hawaii, Colorado, California, Delaware, Tennessee, South Carolina, and Rhode Island.
Jeez. Although the city of Minneapolis is up to $15 an hour minimum wage as of July of this year. But
Sorry, I don't feel compelled to clap for that because
Yeah.
it's still not enough.
Well, still, if you're at that 50% level, that's $7.50 an hour. So it's
It's gross that your employer can apply for that so that they can pay you less money, even though
yeah. Actually, I make 4 times minimum
you're
wage when I'm
using
doing
someone's disability.
snow removal.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I'll stop.
And we're not exactly high flying here with our luxury accommodations. We rent at market rate. We pay just under $1,300 a month, including our parking space.
Yeah, we're
And
swanky
we
now.
have some amenities, like we have heated parking, underground parking.
Secured entry.
I mean, yeah, secured entry with an
Whatever,
actual
it's
call
more
box.
secure than
Which
it
is-
was before.
Right. Package delivery service. There's a front desk that is staffed.
Yeah.
Soon we will have a games room and workout room. But it's not like,
Indoor toilet.
yeah, indoor toilet.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
They put in a rain shower head before we moved in. That was really nice.
That's really nice. And I'm not saying our place is terrible, but like we're at like 800 square feet. It's not even as much as your average home. I don't think. I think your average home is at least 1,000 square feet. It's only a one bedroom.
It's a pretty big.
It's a big one bedroom, but it's what I'm saying is we don't have exactly plush accommodations for me working 4 times minimum wage. So
Oh yeah.
just think
And
of
I work
how
3
much
times it.
person. Yeah, right. So just think of we work the equivalent of 7 minimum wage workers, and this is what we can get.
And we're white.
Well, okay, that too.
No, I shouldn't have said that, but like,
But I mean, it affects things
It
like
does.
our credit score, which is actually okay. It affects a lot of things. So
they just be lying to us all the time.
So the idea that, and the point is, the idea that anyone can get by in the minimum wage is absolutely laughable. And you can have all these arguments of like, oh, it's not meant to be that kind of job, and it's not meant to be. And all it really boils down to in that argument is that, as long as the job is meant for a teenager or meant for someone with lower social status or whatever, then you can just exploit them even harder. That's basically what you're saying is you can exploit children harder. You should be able to. Setting aside the fact that like, a McDonald's worker, which is always the go-to, McDonald's is open all day long, including when class is in session. So it's
Right.
not kids in high school working that job at that time.
Oh, sometimes there's 16-year-olds. They'll skip to go to work.
Which is another can of worms that's really sad as well. Because usually it's because they have to help their family.
Right. But
Or maybe they're even living on their own at that point.
we don't care about families.
You,
I mean, we care about people having birth or giving birth.
Yeah. We care about people being born, but at that point they're on their own.
Yeah. Have the baby now. Fuck you.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yep. And that's always the interesting thing is like, people always say, oh yeah, people should have equal opportunity. But like, when should that start? Should that start when you're born? Because like, you don't have any control over your life whatsoever until you are an adult.
Right.
So should it be from birth until 18 that people have equal opportunity? Because if that's the case, we need to do things like make sure every student has adequate housing, adequate food, because a lot of students are food insecure, which can have a big effect on their performance and their ability to have that equal opportunity.
Yeah, it's a big thing.
Better
You
make
don't meet
sure
that
that-
baseline, they're not going to perform.
Right. Better make sure that they have the same amount of dollars per student going into their school as every other school. Otherwise, again, not equal opportunity.
Special ed gets an extra, like, they get 6,000 a head instead of 4,000 for each student.
Mm-hmm.
But like,
Well,
where does
that's-
the money go?
Right, but that's a different thing. That's an individual needing more because they have extra needs.
Right. I'm illustrating a monetary point that I could.
But yeah, you're right too. So where does that money go? Because like, no, we won't get into the school we work for now. That's fine. Yeah, let's get back into the chapter.
Let's get into it.
Let's get into it.
Working men called a meeting to oppose the war, and many Irish workers came. The meeting called the war a plot by slave owners and asked for the withdrawal of American troops from disputed territory. That year, a convention of New England
And as we found out last time when we were going through this chapter, they were in fact right to believe that this westward expansion, this manifest destiny, which had become the popular phrase of the time, was in fact to expand slavery, because states such as Texas, and I think they said Colorado, and New Mexico, and so forth, ended up becoming slave territories. So they weren't exactly slave states, because they were not states until after the
Later.
fact. But yeah, it did mean the expansion of slavery. So they were absolutely right to be suspicious that this war was just a pretext to expand slavery in the U.S., because it definitely was.
Don't be suspicious. Don't be.
Yeah, right. Don't be suspicious as
Don't be suspicious.
as all these wealthy slave owners are pushing for expansion of U.S. territories.
Workingmen's Association condemned the war and announced they would, quote, not take up arms to sustain the southern slaveholder in robbing 1/5 of our countrymen of their labor, unquote. Some newspapers at the very start of the war protested. Horace Greeley wrote in the New York Tribune, May 12, 1846, quote, we can easily defeat the armies of Mexico, slaughter them by thousands, and pursue them perhaps to their capital. We can conquer and annex their territory, but what then? Have the histories of the ruin of Greek and Roman liberty consequent on such extensions of empire by the sword no lesson for us? Who believes that a score of victories over Mexico, the annexation of half her provinces, will give us more liberty, a purer morality, a more prosperous industry than we now have? Is not life miserable enough? Comes not death soon enough without resort to the hideous enginery of war? What of those who fought the war, the soldiers who marched, sweated, got sick, died? The Mexican soldiers, the American soldiers. We know little of the reactions of Mexican soldiers. We do know that Mexico was a despotism, a land of Indians and mestizos, Indians mixed with Spanish, controlled by criollos, whites of Spanish blood. There were 1 million criollos, 2 million mestizos, 3 million Indians. Was the natural disinclination of peasants to fight for a country owned by landlords overcome by the nationalist spirit roused against an invader? We know much more about the American army. Volunteers, not conscripts, lured by money and opportunity for social advancement via promotion in the armed forces. Half of General Taylor's army were recent immigrants, Irish and German mostly, whereas in 1830,
And it's so funny
1%
to
of the
think about how much, like, okay, the United States dumps like what, $9 trillion into its military, right?
About $1 trillion a year. Yeah,
All right, it's a lot of fucking money.
it's a lot of money.
And
An unfathomable amount of money. Yeah.
you have all this money to delegate into that, but then I see countless veterans wandering the streets, homeless. These
cold
people
weather,
put
yeah.
their ass on the line for this country, and now they have nothing.
Right.
What kind of thanks is that? I can't imagine how traumatic it is to be in the military, because you're like deprogrammed, and then having to come back into society where like empathy and emotion is helpful to you,
Right.
but not having access to that, and then like, oh yeah, well, thanks for your service. It's just,
Yeah.
it's cheap.
That's basically all they get anymore. Well, I mean,
And a free
the
meal
VA
on
isn't
veterans.
terrible, but
No, but like,
but yeah, there's a lot of homeless vets, and they're always they're always brought up when we're talking about doing like foreign aid and stuff. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, we have homeless veterans. Okay,
Yeah, why is
should we feed
that?
them? Should we get them off the street? Oh no, we don't want to do anything about that either.
right, like you don't get to pull that card and then not
Right.
address the facts.
Yeah, it's incredible, and it's something that I find hard to understand, just how much disdain the the U.S. has in general for its veterans. Like once they're out of the military, they're basically seen as worthless anymore because their only function was to expand and maintain U.S. empire.
That's just so hurtful.
Yeah. It exposes a really big lie that you're going to get all this glory and support and thanks and
Honor.
honor but then also material benefits for being a soldier.
It's like, oh, you can take out a VA loan on a single home that you buy. Well, shouldn't you be able to take that out every single time that you buy a home?
Or shouldn't you just be given a home,
Well,
right? Given an
sorry,
education.
we gotta keep the bar low because we don't want to get anyone upset about.
Yeah.
We're not giving out handouts.
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, and that's part of it too. Is we have such a disdain for the welfare state that even though it might include people that we otherwise venerate to the point of not being able to criticize them, they still somehow fall through the cracks on that, and they get thrown under the bus. Like, you shouldn't get a handout. You shouldn't be. These programs are not helping people because they're giving them something for nothing.
Right, I think you're right, James. Like, if they aren't serving, they aren't going to be served. It's like the highest tier is active military. It's like, that's ridiculous.
Oh, and hey, Rain 909, good to see you too. It's been a while.
Population of the United States was foreign-born. By the Mexican War, the number was reaching 10%. Their patriotism was not very strong. Their belief in all arguments for expansion paraded in the newspapers was probably not great. Indeed, many of them deserted to the Mexican side, enticed by money. Some
funny.
enlisted in the Mexican army and formed their own battalion, the San Patricio, St. Patrick's Battalion.
Huh?
At first, there seemed to be enthusiasm in the army, fired by pay and patriotism. Martial spirit was high in New York, but the legislature authorized the governor to call 50,000.
You gotta consider a good sizable chunk of these people die while serving, so where does that money go?
Hey, that's just profits for the U.S. then. I mean, I suppose in theory it would go to their families, but who knows how often that actually happened. Or if they don't find ways to make sure as little of that as possible goes back to anyone who's not serving either.
Volunteers. Placards read, "Mexico or death." There was a mass meeting of 20,000 people in Philadelphia. 3,000 volunteered in Ohio. This initial spirit soon wore off. A woman in Greensboro, North Carolina, recorded in her diary, quote, "Tuesday, January 5th, 1847. Today was a general muster and speeches by Mr. Gorrell and Mr. Henry. General Logan received them in this street and requested all the volunteers to follow afterwards. As he walked up and down the street, I saw some 6 or 7 bad-looking persons following, with poor Jim Lane in front. How many poor creatures have been and are still to be sacrificed upon the altar of pride and ambition?" Posters appeared for volunteers in Massachusetts. "Men of old Essex, men of Newburyport, rally around the bold, gallant, and lion-hearted Cushing. He will lead you to victory and to glory." They promised pay of $7 to $10 a month and spoke of a federal bounty of $24 and 160 acres of land. But one man wrote anonymously to the Cambridge
$7 to
Chronicle.
$10. How many years ago was
Neither
this?
have I the least idea
And we're
of
justifying
joining
that as a minimum
or in
wage?
any way assisting the unjust waging war against Mexico. I have no wish to participate in such glorious butcheries of women and children as were displayed in the capture of Monterey, etc. Neither have I any desire to place myself under the dictation of a petty military tyrant, to every caprice of whose will I must yield implicit obedience. No, sirree. As long as I can work beg or go to the poorhouse, I won't go to Mexico to be lodged in the damp ground, half starved, half roasted, bitten by mosquitoes and centipedes, stung by scorpions and tarantulas, marched, drilled, and flogged, and then stuck up to be shot at for $8 a month and putrid rations. Well, I won't.
So Rain says they should at least be paid to have these soldiers deprogrammed in order to learn how to reintegrate into society. Absolutely true. And we still don't really take PTSD seriously in this country.
No, we don't.
And Rain says without it, we get PTSD-filled time bombs that self-destruct and can't keep jobs. Yeah, absolutely true.
But we don't value mental health care in this country either because there's so much stigma around it, which is silly, and like it's not covered usually under insurance. It's like, oh, you can only have 6 visits a year. Well, what if you have fucking bipolar disorder or schizophrenia? You only get 6. What the hell is that going to do for you?
It's a drop in the bucket. Doesn't really help. And Rain says, P.S. This is not to blame the veterans. They didn't have a choice. And and of course, and I mean literally,
they were under different expectations, I'm sure. So
well, and you know, our system of basically coercing young men and women into the military hinges on capitalist exploitation, in that it's banking on a lot of very poor cities across the country and small towns where there's not a lot of other options. Like either you go into the military, you maybe go into the large business nearby if there is one, or you risk, you know, falling into drugs or falling into ruin of one kind or another. So that's a big that's a big way that we recruit, so to speak. You know, it's really more coercion than anything. But yeah,
I totally was going to add something and then I forgot.
that's okay.
Is it okay?
Yeah,
It
I'm
was
sure
kind
it'll
of
come back.
important.
Okay, so were you thinking about the coercive system that produces us lots of military recruits?
Oh yeah, there we go. I actually was. I took the ASVAB.
Which means
That's the military test. And then I was in high school. I was like a senior in high school, and my scores were really. I'm trying to brag, but my scores were really high, so I had recruiters coming after me all the time because my parents didn't sign me out of having to take that test. I was forced to take it. And there were armed military people in the room while we took it. Couldn't even leave to go to the bathroom without an escort.
wow,
It's pretty intense.
that really is intense.
But that's commonplace. Like,
Oh yeah,
there's a lot of schools that'll do that.
and put the hard press on, you know,
Yeah.
children, literally children. Make them make decisions that could easily affect their life forever, no matter what happens to them in the military. And yeah, Rain says that's why we'll never have free college or health care, because we need to coerce more people into the military, and that's a way to get free medical and education, or you know, as close to free as possible. Yeah, I'm glad you changed your mind, James.
Me too, James.
Yeah, I briefly considered the military too, because I thought it might be. I was into photography. I mean, I still am into photography, but I was thinking about making a career of photography, and I thought, hell, maybe this will be a way that I can get training and money for college and stuff like that. But after talking to the recruiter, I was not impressed. So luckily, I too decided not to take that route.
Oh, it's really interesting how they correlate the scores with branches of the military. So, like, highest scores are required by the Navy, then Air Force, then Army, then National Guard, then Marines.
Yep.
Marines, they just want the physical.
Yeah. I just want a lot of bodies to throw at problems.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's a really cruel and sick, twisted system that we have.
James, what branch did you almost go for? I was gonna go in Air Force.
Yeah, I was thinking about the Army. First one not to go, Grandpa and all the
Woo!
uncles. Well, good breaking that chain.
Army?
Yeah, me too.
Way to go, James.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This is
Yeah, but you
scary.
don't know at the time either. Like, you know, when you're a teenager, you've probably seen dozens of war movies that glorify all that. And like, oh, especially, I can't imagine what teens growing up today are thinking, you know, just being subjected to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is almost entirely just a big rah-rah military sort of endeavor. Thanks for the follow, Vlocker TQ9. We are looking at People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn tonight. All right, let's continue on in the chapter.
Human butchery has had its day, and the time is rapidly approaching when the professional soldier will be placed on the same level as a bandit, the Bedouin, and the thug. Reports grew of men forced to be volunteers impressed for service. One James Miller of Norfolk, Virginia, protested that he had been persuaded, quote, by the influence of an unusual quantity of ardent spirits, unquote, to sign a paper enrolling for military service. Quote, next morning, I was dragged aboard of a boat landed at Fort Monroe and closely immured in the guardhouse for 16 days, unquote. I didn't give him a voice because I'm from Norfolk, Virginia, so it's my voice. There were extravagant promises and outright lies to build up the volunteer units. A man who wrote a history of the New York volunteers declared, quote, if it is cruel to drag black men from their homes, how much more cruel it is to drag white men from their homes under false inducements, and compelling them to leave their wives and children without leaving a cent or any protection in the coldest season of the year, to die in a foreign and sickly climate. Many enlisted for the sake of their families, having no employment and having been offered 3 months advance, and were promised that they could leave part of their pay for their families to draw in their absence. I boldly pronounce that the whole regiment was got up by fraud. A fraud on the soldier, a fraud on the city of New York, and a fraud on the government of the United States. By late 1846, recruitment was falling off, so physical requirements were lowered, and anyone bringing in acceptable recruits would get $2 a head. Even this didn't work. Congress in early 1847 authorized 10 new regiments of regulars to serve for the duration of the war, promising them 100 acres of public land upon honorable discharge, but dissatisfaction continued. Volunteers complained that the regulars were given special treatment. Enlisted men complained that the officers treated them as inferiors. And soon, the reality of battle came in upon the glory and the promises. On the Rio Grande, before Matamoros, as a Mexican army of 5,000 under General Arista faced Taylor's army of 3,000, the shells began to fly. And artilleryman Samuel French saw his first death in battle. John Weems describes it. Quote, he happened to be staring at a man on horseback nearby when he saw a shot rip off the pommel of the saddle, tear through the man's body, and burst out with a crimson gush on the other side. Pieces of bone or metal tore into the horse's hip, split the lip and tongue, and knocked teeth out of a second horse and broke the jaw of a third. Lieutenant Grant, with the 4th Regiment, quote, saw a ball crash into ranks nearby, tear a musket from one soldier's grasp, and rip off the man's head, then dissect the face of a captain he knew. When the battle was over, 500 Mexicans were dead or wounded. There were perhaps 50 American casualties. Weems describes the aftermath, quote, night blanketed weary men who fell asleep where they dropped on the trampled prairie grass, while around them other prostrate men from both armies screamed and groaned in agony from wounds. By the eerie light of torches, the surgeon saw was going the livelong night.
Yeah, not quite so heroic and fun when you actually give a realistic description of it, is it?
And you're going through these traumatic experiences without any anesthesia or anything like that, or if supplies are short. You're going to feel everything.
Yeah. Well, as he was just talking about the surgeon's saw going the live long night away,
Right.
like they're not sawing off limbs because, they have a lot of good options.
Right. It's like a tourniquet was used, and
Uh-huh.
you have to then.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, it sounds like, war's one of the most horrific things that people do to each other.
Oh, we're bored.
Yeah. Yeah, at least they're not bored.
I mean, it's like every person that said they were
God.
bored and they thought war would be exciting. It's like, then you go fight.
Yeah, right.
You're on the front
Well,
line.
that's never going to be the case.
Right.
People can just sit there and run their mouth and send other people to die. Sometimes literally in their stead.
Right.
Yep. All right. Let's hear some more.
Away from the battle, in the army camps, the romance of the recruiting posters was quickly forgotten. A young artillery officer wrote about the men camped at Corpus Christi in the summer of 1845, even before the war began. Quote, "It becomes our painful task to allude to the sickness, suffering, and death from criminal negligence. 2/3 of the tents furnished to the army on taking the field were worn out and rotten, provided for campaigning in a country almost deluged 3 months in the year. During the whole of November and December, either the rains were pouring down with violence or the furious northers were showering the frail tent poles and rending the rotten canvas. For days and weeks, every article in hundreds of tents was thoroughly soaked. During those terrible months, the sufferings of the sick in the crowded hospital tents were horrible beyond conception." The 2nd Regiment of Mississippi Rifles, moving into New Orleans, was stricken by cold and sickness. The regimental surgeon reported, quote, "6 months after our regiment had entered the service, we had sustained a loss of 167 by death and 134 by discharges," unquote. The regiment was packed into the holds of transports, 800 men into 3 ships. The surgeon continued, quote, "The dark cloud of disease still hovered around us. The holds of the ships were soon crowded with the sick. The effluvia was intolerable. The ship became rough. Through the long, dark night, the rolling ship would dash the sick men from side to side, bruising his flesh upon the rough corners of his berth. The wild screams of the delirious, the lamentations of the sick, and the melancholy groans of the dying kept up one continual scene of confusion. 4 weeks we were confined to the loathsome
And
ships.
you're not
and
around
before
your
we
loved
landed in
ones
Brussels,
either when
we
you're about to
consigned
die. Like,
Yeah, dying far from home, someplace you've never been or never intended to go to, a place full of disease and just misery. That seems like a really awful way to go.
I don't want to be around my people.
Right? Right.
the 8 of our men to the dark waves." Unquote. Meanwhile, by land and sea, Anglo-American forces were moving into California. A young naval officer, after a long voyage around the southern cape of South America and up the coast to Monterey in California, wrote in his diary, "Asia will be brought to our very doors. Population will flow into the fertile regions of California. The resources of the entire country will be developed. The public lands lying along the route of railroads will be changed from deserts into gardens, and a large population will be settled." It was a separate war that went on in California, where Anglo-Americans raided Spanish settlements, stole horses, and declared California separated from Mexico, the Bear Flag Republic. Indians lived there, and Naval Officer Revere gathered the Indian chiefs and spoke to them, as he later recalled, "I have called you together to have a talk with you. The country you inhabit no longer belongs to Mexico, but to a mighty nation whose territory extends from the great ocean you have all seen or heard of to another great ocean thousands of miles toward the rising sun. I am an officer of that great country, and to get here have traversed both of these great oceans in a ship of war, which, with a terrible noise, spits forth flames and hurls forth instruments of destruction, dealing death to all our enemies. But you have nothing to fear from us."
I might have
If
to
you
step
do,
out. This
let us
chair is
know.
too much.
Yeah, you've had enough for tonight.
Sorry.
That's
This chair is
okay.
really painful.
I appreciate you being on for this time. I'm sure everyone else appreciates you being on too. Always the
Hi,
crowd
folks.
favorite.
I might come back. We'll see. This
Okay.
chair is really uncomfortable.
I know, we need to get you an actual
I put
office
one on my
chair.
holiday list.
That's good. Let's hope you get it.
Maybe if I'm good this year.
Maybe. But are you being good this year?
Yeah.
Okay.
You're like, no, you're not.
I didn't say that.
It was implied.
Yeah, was it? Okay. All right, anyway. Thank you, Amanda, for being on so
Same
far,
way,
and
come
hopefully you'll
if
be
you
able
need
to come back tonight.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
James says just because you don't want to hang out with him doesn't mean you have to blame the chair.
No, the chair really hurts, James. You have no idea.
And Nathan says, bye, have a good night. Thank you for the stream.
If you are faithful to your new rulers, we come to prepare this magnificent region for the use of other men, for the population of the world demands more room, and here is room enough for many millions who will hereafter occupy and till the soil. But in admitting others, we shall not displace you if you act properly. You can easily learn, but you are indolent.
Another promise. Let's see how this one comes out for the native peoples of California.
I hope you will alter your habits and be industrious and frugal and give up all the low vices which you practice.
Like, say, genocide? I would call that a pretty low vice, but that's just me.
But if you are lazy and dissipated, you must, before many years, become extinct. We shall watch over you
Jesus.
and give you true liberty. But beware of sedition, lawlessness, and other crimes, for the army which shields can assuredly punish, and it will reach you in your most retired hiding places. General Kearney moved easily into New Mexico, and Santa Fe was taken without a battle. An American staff officer described the reaction of the Mexican population to the U.S. Army's entrance into the capital city. Our march into the city was extremely warlike, with drawn sabers and daggers in every look. From around corners, men with surly countenances and downcast looks regarded us with watchfulness, if not terror. And black eyes looked through latticed windows at our column of cavaliers, some gleaming with pleasure, others filled with tears. As the American flag was raised, and the cannon boomed its glorious national salute from the hill, the pent-up emotions of many of the women could be suppressed no longer. As the wail of grief arose above the din of our horses' tread and reached our ears from the depth of the gloomy-looking buildings on every hand. That was in August. In December, Mexicans in Taos, New Mexico, rebelled against American rule. As a report to Washington put it, quote, many of the most influential persons in the northern part of this territory were engaged in the rebellion, unquote. The revolt was put down and arrests were made, but many of the rebels fled and carried on sporadic attacks, killing a number of Americans, then hiding in the mountains. The American army pursued, and in a final desperate battle in which 600 to 700 rebels were engaged, 150 were killed, and it seemed the rebellion was now over. In Los Angeles, too, there was a revolt. Mexicans forced the American garrison there to surrender in September 1846. The United States did not retake Los Angeles until January, after a bloody battle. General Taylor had moved across the Rio Grande, occupied Matamoros, and now moved southward through Mexico, but his volunteers became more unruly on Mexican territory. Mexican villages were pillaged. One officer wrote in his diary in the summer of 1846, quote, we reached Barita about 5 p.m. Many of the Louisiana volunteers were there, a lawless, drunken rabble. They had driven away the inhabitants, taken possession of their homes, and were emulating each other in making beasts of themselves. Cases of rape began to multiply. As the soldiers moved up the Rio Grande to Camargo, the heat became unbearable, the water impure, and sickness grew, diarrhea, dysentery, and other maladies, until 1,000 were dead. At first, the dead were buried to the sounds of the Dead March, played by a military band. Then the number of dead was too great, and formal military funerals ceased. Southward to Monterey and another battle, where men and horses died in agony, and one officer described the ground as slippery with foam and blood.
Ugh.
After Taylor's army took Monterey, he reported, quote, some shameful atrocities by the Texas Rangers, and he sent them home when their enlistment expired. But others continued robbing and killing Mexicans. A group of men from a Kentucky regiment broke into one Mexican dwelling, threw out the husband, and raped his wife. Mexican guerrillas retaliated with cruel vengeance. As the American armies advanced, more battles were fought, more thousands died on both sides, more thousands were wounded, more thousands sick with diseases. At one battle north of Chihuahua, 300 Mexicans were killed and 500 wounded, according to the American accounts, with few Anglo-American casualties. Quote, "The surgeons are now busily engaged in administering relief to the wounded Mexicans, and it is a sight to see the pile of legs and arms that have been amputated." Unquote. An artillery captain named John Vinton, writing to his mother, told of sailing to Veracruz. Quote, "The weather is delightful. Our troops are in good health and spirits, and all things look auspicious of success. I am only afraid the Mexicans will not meet us and give us battle, for to gain everything without controversy, after our large and expensive preparations, would give us officers no chance for exploits and honors." Vinton died during the siege of Veracruz. The U.S. bombardment of the city became an indiscriminate killing of civilians. One of the Navy's shell...
Okay, just listen to the contrast between the way that the officers describe war and battle as a glorious, honorable thing that gives officers the ability to gain merits and all this stuff. And like, it'd be a shame if we didn't actually have a battle after all of this stuff. Versus these very horrific accounts of the way that the war is actually waged. Yeah, maybe the kinds of people that are not directly going through that sort of a battle should not be the ones, or maybe the kinds of people that aren't going through that should also be. Okay, what am I trying to say? They shouldn't be the ones in charge. You know, the senators, the people in power, the higher up officers, that sort of thing, should not be the ones in charge because they're not the ones feeling all of the horrors of what the war actually is. That's right, ACAB even. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it's hard to not include the military as a police force as well. So you're right, Rain.
Hit the post office. Others burst all over the city. A Mexican observer wrote, "The surgical hospital, which was situated in the convent of Santo Domingo, suffered from the fire, and several of the inmates were killed by fragments of bombs bursting at that point. While an operation was being performed on a wounded man, the explosion of a shell extinguished the lights, and when other illumination was brought, the patient was found torn in pieces, and many others dead and wounded." In 2 days, 1,300 shells were fired into the city until it surrendered. A reporter from the New Orleans Delta wrote, quote, "Mexicans variously estimate their loss at from 500 to 1,000 killed and wounded, but all agree that the loss among the soldiery is comparatively small, and the destruction among the women and children is very great." Unquote. Colonel Hitchcock, coming into the city, wrote, quote, "I shall never forget the horrible fire of our mortars, going with dreadful certainty and bursting with sepulchral tones, often in the center of private dwellings. It was awful. I shudder to think of it." Still, Hitchcock, the dutiful soldier, wrote for General Scott, quote, "a sort of address to the Mexican people," unquote, which was then printed in English and Spanish by the tens of thousands, saying, quote, "We have not a particle of ill will towards you. We treat you with all civility. We are not, in fact, your enemies. We do not plunder your people or insult your women or your religion. We are here for no earthly purpose except the hope of obtaining a peace."
Mm-hmm.
That was Hitchcock the soldier. Then we have Weems the historian. Quote, "If Hitchcock, the old anti-war philosopher, thus seemed to fit Henry David Thoreau's description of small movable forts and magazines at the service of some unscrupulous man in power, it should be remembered that Hitchcock was, first of all, a soldier, and a good one, as conceded even by the superiors he had antagonized. It was a war of the American elite against the Mexican elite, each side exhorting, using, killing its own population as well as the other. The Mexican commander, Santa Anna, had crushed rebellion after rebellion, his troops also raping and plundering after victory. When Colonel Hitchcock and General Winfield Scott moved into Santa Anna's estate, they found its walls full of ornate paintings, but half his army dead or wounded. General Winfield Scott moved toward the last battle for Mexico City with 10,000 soldiers. They were not anxious for battle. 3 days' march from Mexico City at Jalapa, 7 of his 11 regiments evaporated, their enlistment times up. Justin Smith writes, "It would have been quite agreeable to linger at Jalapa, but the soldiers had learned what campaigning really meant. They had been allowed to go unpaid and unprovided for. They had met with hardships and privations not counted upon at a time of enlistment. Disease, battle, death, fearful toil, and frightful marches had been found realities. In spite of their strong desire to see the halls of the Montezumas, out of about 3,700 men, only enough to make one company would re-engage, and special inducements offered by the general to remain as teamsters proved wholly ineffective." On the outskirts of Mexico City, at Churubusco, Mexican and American armies clashed for 3 hours. As Weems describes it, quote, "Those fields around Churubusco were now covered with thousands of human casualties and with mangled bodies of horses and mules that blocked roads and filled ditches. 4,000 Mexicans lay dead or wounded. 3,000 others had been captured, including 69 U.S. Army deserters who required the protection of Scott's officers to escape execution at the hands of their former comrades. The Americans lost nearly 1,000 men killed, wounded, or missing." As often in war, battles were fought without point. After one such engagement near Mexico City with terrible casualties, a Marine lieutenant blamed General Scott, quote, "He had originated it in error and caused it to be fought with inadequate forces for an object that had no existence," unquote. In the final battle for Mexico City, Anglo-American troops took the height of Chapultepec and entered the city of 200,000 people, General Santa Anna having moved northward. This was September 1847. A Mexican merchant wrote to a friend about the bombardment of the city. Quote, "In some cases, whole blocks were destroyed, and a great number of men, women, and children killed and wounded." General Santa Anna fled to Huamantla, where another battle was fought, and he had to flee again. An infantry lieutenant wrote to his parents what happened after an officer named Walker was killed in battle. Quote, "General Lane told us to avenge the death of the gallant Walker, to take all we could lay hands on, and well and fearfully was his mandate obeyed. Grog shops were broken open first, and then, maddened with liquor, every species of outrage was committed. Old women and girls were stripped of their clothing, and many suffered still greater outrages. Men were shot by dozens, their property, churches, stores, and dwelling houses ransacked. Dead horses and men lay about pretty thick, while drunken soldiers, yelling and screeching, were breaking open houses or chasing some poor Mexicans who had abandoned their houses and fled for life. Such a scene I never hope to see again. It gave me a lamentable view of human nature, and made me, for the first time, ashamed of my country." The editors of Chronicles of the Gringos sum up the attitude of the American soldiers to the war. Quote, "Although they had volunteered to go to war, and by far the greater number of them honored their commitments by creditably sustaining hardship in battle, and behaved as well as soldiers in a hostile country are apt to behave, they did not like the army. They did not like war, and generally speaking, they did not like Mexico or the Mexicans. This was the majority, disliking the job, resenting the discipline and caste system of the army, and wanting to get out and go home." One Pennsylvania volunteer stationed at Matamoros late in the war wrote, "We are under very strict discipline here. Some of our officers are very good men, but the balance of them are very tyrannical and brutal toward the men. Tonight on drill, an officer laid a soldier's skull open with his sword. But the time may come, and that soon, when officers and men will stand on equal footing. A soldier's life is very disgusting." On the night of August 15th, 1847, volunteer regiments from Virginia, Mississippi, and North Carolina rebelled in northern Mexico against Colonel Robert Treat Payne. Payne killed a mutineer, but 2 of his lieutenants refused to help him quell the mutiny. The rebels were ultimately exonerated in an attempt to keep the peace. Desertion grew. In March 1847, the Army reported over 1,000 deserters. The total number of deserters during the war was 9,207. 5,331 regulars, 3,876 volunteers. Those who did not desert became harder and harder to manage. General Cushing referred to 65 such men in the 1st Regiment of the Massachusetts Infantry as, quote, "incorrigibly mutinous and insubordinate," unquote. The glory of the victory was for the president and the generals, not the deserters, the dead, the wounded. Of the 2nd Regiment of Mississippi Rifles, 167 died of disease. 2 regiments from Pennsylvania went out 1,800 strong and came home with 600. John Calhoun of South Carolina said in Congress that 20% of the troops had died of battle or sickness. The Massachusetts volunteers had started with 630 men. They came home with 300 dead, mostly from disease, and at the reception dinner on their return, their commander, General Cushing, was hissed by his men. The Cambridge Chronicle wrote, quote, "Charges of the most serious nature against one and all of these military officials dropped daily from the lips of the volunteers." As the veterans returned home, speculators immediately showed up to buy the land warrants given by the government. Many of the soldiers, desperate for money, sold their 160 acres for less than $50. The New York Commercial Advertiser said in June 1847, "It is a well-known fact that immense fortunes were made out of the poor soldiers who shed their blood in the Revolutionary War by speculators who preyed upon their distresses. A similar system of depredation was practiced upon the soldiers of the last war." Mexico surrendered. There were calls among Americans to take all of Mexico. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, signed February 1848, took just half. The Texas boundary was set at the Rio Grande. New Mexico and California were ceded. The United States paid Mexico $15 million, which led the Whig intelligencer to conclude that, quote, "We take nothing by conquest, thank God."
Look at the spin there. Oh, take nothing by conquest, thank God, which is the name of the chapter. Wow. And just the land grab of the land grab. You know, all these soldiers promised their 160 acres, forced into such desperate circumstances that they end up getting nothing for it in the end, and forced to sell to other land speculators. So, as per usual, the lowest ranks of the military are not the ones that benefit from war at all, like at all, and the ones that come out the best, the ones that already had land and money to begin with. How about that?
Unquote. So ends Chapter 8 of Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States.
And that's the end of the chapter. That was, another very graphic chapter, but important to keep these much more realistic depictions of war, something that is always shown as like, oh, you have a heroic band of men that rush into battle. They cheer each other on. You know, it's a quick shot to their enemies' hearts as they fall away and then surrender, and that's it. But these descriptions of you know, the streets being thick with horses and men, and the ground being slick with foam and blood, and the cannon shells ripping apart people and horses and all this stuff. These are the realistic depictions of war. And that's important to keep in mind. So when you have the horrors of actual warfare, so you're not even getting glory out of it. It's not what's depicted in popular retellings, you know, however the medium may be at the time. And then you also have the people that do most of the fighting ending up with nothing in the end, just like what we saw with the Revolutionary War, where most of the enlisted men, the lowest ranks, ended up with virtually nothing by the end, and were often not paid their wages due to them, and were just kind of scammed out of everything, half starved by the end of things. Just like in the Revolutionary War, we see the same thing happening in this war of conquest. And just at the end, that's so disingenuous to say, oh, well, because we paid Mexico money for the land that we forced them to cede through warfare. Well, we didn't get that land by conquest because we paid for it outright. God, what a disgusting propaganda machine. And society was in control of things back then, and you know, in many regards is till this day. Phew. Next one's going to be hard. The next chapter is getting into slavery, and there are a lot of first-hand accounts that use the N-word. And so I'm going to either have to find a clean version of the audiobook that does not include that, or I'm going to have to go through and edit and re-put out a new version myself, because, you know, as I've said before, I don't think it. Yeah, I can use the beep button, but I just don't think it adds anything to the commentary to have that word included. So whether or not it even technically violates terms of service on any platform is kind of, you know, it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant to me. I don't want that word in there. We can have graphic depictions of brutality and things that people do. I think that is important to illustrate and not sanitize, but I think that particular slur serves no purpose to include. So, Vlockert says, "Hi, I want to offer promotion of your channel, viewers, followers, blah blah blah. The price is lower than any competitor." Oh, great! It's an ad bot. It's auto on, really? Incredibly flexible and convenient. Okay. Yeah. So we are gonna block you, bud. We don't need any sort of chat bots. Spam. I guess we'll report you as well. Yeah, I will be raiding a channel. Or raid the channel blocker. Yeah, okay. Yeah, let's raid into another channel. I know we typically go till 9 o'clock, but I think this is a good place to leave it off, because I'm going to have to figure out what my next move is going to be for covering this book. So I think this is a good place to leave it for tonight. So if you have any suggestions of who we should raid, I was kind of thinking about the Antifada. They're a pretty good channel. I see Idan Simpson is just come on as well. That'll be another good one. Chapo Trap House, Epic Prawn, Beer Bash Johnson we did last night, so we'll skip their channel for tonight. Boy Meets Mini. There's a lot of good ones on right now, so if any of them strike your fancy and you want to have us raid into them, let me know. We could also just raid Hassan with our handful of viewers, see if he notices. Ali Osher? Alright. Ali Osher it will be then. Alright. Thank you all for joining tonight. I really do appreciate that. First, I do want to, ban Evader and Moderate. Yeah, he's already coming up, that account. Coming up as a ban Evader. So we are going to report. It is spam, scams, or bots. Next, spam. Yeah, who knows if it's phishing links. So it could be spam, it could be scam. I don't even know. It's probably all of those things. Spam, scam, and bots, but we'll just go with spam. Oh, I guess scam is more accurate, because he's not spamming the chat. He's just pushing links that are probably dubious in nature. So there we go. All right, submit report. We're going to block that user at the same time. That's the end of that one. Listed under scumbot, yeah. All right, let's rate Ali Osher tonight. See what Ali is covering. Blowing up power substations. Why? Masterclass in civics and procedure. Cool. We'll see what Ali Osher has to say then. All right, we will shout out Ali as well before we raid his channel. So go check out their content. I highly recommend it. So there we go. And we will start the raid now. So just hang on, everybody. All right, thanks for joining. See you all this Sunday. I think we're going to continue on with doing the audiobook of Permaculture Designer's Manual. So look forward to that.